G'day everyone. Yeah, g'day future self when I'm trying to remember how to prime this truck and I'm looking at my old videos again. But basically, yeah, Sterling truck built sometime in 2006. Um, Changed the fuel filters as you do. I tried to pressurize the fuel tanks and fill the filters that way, which was a disaster. Um, she was here and had lost its prime and was sitting in the workshop with the trailer sticking out for a few days. But anyway, now to prime the truck, this truck, which has the Mercedes mbe4000 engine hiding in there, what you got to do, the plan is to get each breather, each tank has a breather, hook an 8mm 516 fuel line up between the two tanks. Both tanks have a breather like this. It needs to go into a T-piece, and you need to pressurize both tanks at once, because if you pressurize one tank or one tank more than the other, the fuel will transfer from left to right or right to left. So here are the T-pieces. There's your fuel going in, and then there's the fuel return. So there's two T-pieces, and yeah, one side goes to the other. There's no lines on the bottom of the tank. It must siphon from one side to the other. It's called a equiflow fuel tank. So basically the first problem I had was the fuel transferring from one tank to the other because I pressurized only one tank. Then the next problem was my compressor wasn't big enough to pressurize both tanks, or just the system I've got between the compressor and the tanks. I've got a regulator, so that slowed down the air. So I ended up with two compressors. I had a compressor, one on each tank. That still made the fuel transfer from one tank to another. So I made up a kind of fuel line manifold with a couple of T-pieces, and basically the air has to be the same going into both tanks. So you're pressurizing it evenly. You need to check the fuel tank level is not uneven too much before you pressurize it, or before you repressurize it. So what you got to do is pressurize the tanks. You can undo, this one's got a fuel filter here. This is your first fuel filter separator. So undo this, the fuel comes out. Undo this line down at the pump. The pump's down there. That's the pump there on this one. The pump's driven off the engine down there. So basically undo that, fuel comes out. And then that line, so that the fuel goes from this filter, it goes here, it goes into this heat exchanger here, which cools the electronic side of things. It goes through there, it goes there, it goes into the pump, and then it comes out of the pump on the other side, and the line goes along and back up here. But you have to crank over the engine. Once you get fuel here, you crank over the engine and you observe it coming out here, because the engine's pumping the pump and it's starting to come out here. Now the other thing you got to do is you got to clamp off the return line, which is the blue one there. So the blue line, it comes out on the bottom of the filter. So the filter's got, this is the outlet going to the injectors. this smaller line here is the return coming from the injectors, and this other line is coming up around, and there's this one here. Now, you've got a valve on the bottom of the housing there. So this fuel filter housing is actually pressurized when it's going, so that's different. But this valve, like this fitting comes off here, and when it comes off, it's got a valve in here which closes and stops all the diesel running out of the filter. Because if you get to this point and you go, okay, I've got fuel coming out here now, but the fuel filter's still empty, you have to clamp off the return line, because otherwise if you don't clamp off the return, the fuel is being pushed from the tank up into the return. So if you just leave it the way it is, the fuel will be just coming in from all directions, and you won't be able to bleed it, because basically every single place where you loosen a fitting, the fuel will come out, because it's coming up the return as well as the inlet. So basically I had to disconnect this. Maybe you get away with just clamping it off. So once I got fuel up here, and it all sort of, maybe it took a few attempts. There's a lot of diesel in containers underneath there. There's a great big, oil slick on the floor. As you get, there's diesel everywhere. So it took a few attempts, but the long and short of it is basically I got fuel up to here, I pulled the top off here, and I manually filled it up with diesel. If you try to fill it up with diesel without clamping this line off, the diesel will just run back into the return. If it's under pressure, it would come out there. So basically you have to clamp off the return. You have to clamp off the return and then sort out the fuel going in. So basically fill that up. The fuel's up to here, the pump's primed, you fill this up, that line's clamped off so that the fuel isn't coming up through there and confusing everything and blowing more air into it. Now it's a bit tricky, because it's like you're trying to get the air out of it, and the air's got the fuel comes out of here, but then the return with any air goes back into the filter, which makes things difficult. So if that line's clamped off, there's no return. So it pushes the pressure up in the high pressure system. So this line here is probably underrated for what it does, but it's stood the test of time so far. It's been on there for a couple of years, because a couple of years back it split this hose and I put this on here. But these run between 60 and 80 or something psi up to the injectors, and so basically that's high pressurizing the diesel to the injectors, and you've blocked off the return. So basically the pressure goes up in here, which helps the injectors get the fuel initially and start the thing. So once it starts going, you've got enough pressure in here, but you've also got a bunch of air in there too, which it's trying to push out the return, and it would be all through the rail, So then you take the clamp off the return line, and with the engine running, and revving, put your foot down, make it go once it's going, and as soon as you pull that clamp off, it'll start to die, because the fuel pressure drops, and it might take a few attempts at clamping it and getting it to go again, and then releasing the line on the return line, and then it starts to push out the air. But at the same time, the pressure in the high pressure system between here and here is dropping because you've undone the return line. Once there's no air in it, then its system of regulating the fuel pressure works because it's not full of air. And I don't know too much about that. I have read that it's basically, on some of them at least, it's just basically a couple of orifices, and it just pumps fuel up to the injectors, and the pressure is achieved from a restriction on the way back through the return, rather than a more sophisticated, you know, pressure regulation device or something. So yeah, so basically you're clamping off that. You're getting the fuel up to here with your pressure in the tank. You're getting it right up to the pump. You're getting someone to wind it over, preferably not doing it on your own like I did, but you're basically getting, once it's winding over, you're starting to get fuel coming out here. So get someone to do that, bleed it off. Once fuel starts coming out here, you have to make sure this is full, or you can try and bleed it out here too. But I made sure it was full, and the fuel was up to here. The line was already clamped off. So yeah, but you can't start it without the line clamped off. Like it'll just go there forever. The fuel will go out the return line. It's not building up enough pressure soon enough. So yeah, I was stuck on this for a while. It was one of those things where I was thinking, shit, I might have to ring someone for advice, but it worked out in the end. So yeah, there you go.